I was sitting across from a friend at a high-end cafe in Bangalore recently. He's 34, a senior manager at a tech firm, and he had just parked his brand new SUV outside. On the surface, he is the poster child for the new India. But as he sipped his artisanal latte, he wasn't talking about his career trajectory or his upcoming trip to Europe. Instead, he showed me a grainy, yellowed photo on his phone, a picture of his childhood living room from 1992. In the photo, there was a single rotary phone on a wooden stool and a bulky, shutter-style television. "My father worked one job for 35 years, he said, his voice carrying a strange mix of envy and exhaustion. He never owned a car like mine, but he also never checked his email at 11 p.m. I have everything he dreamed of, yet I feel like I'm suffocating under the weight of it all." The contradiction was jarring. Just moments later, his father called to remind him to save every paisa and stay humble, while simultaneously a notification popped up from his global director in London demanding a disruptive, high-growth strategy by morning. He looked at the phone, then at me, looking completely drained. He was trapped between the work first, enjoy later values of a socialist, scarcity-driven past and the growth at all costs demands of a hyper-capitalist present. That quiet moment of burnout in a loud, expensive cafe perfectly captures the silent crisis of India's Gen Y. They are the bridge generation, the ones who grew up in the analog shadows of landlines and scooters only to be catapulted into a digital world of 10% real estate inflation and global competition. They are expected to be the obedient, traditional children their Gen X parents recognize, while being the aggressive, innovative professionals the modern market demands. No generation in history has been asked to carry two such fundamentally different worlds at once. But as the debt rises and the mental health statistics climb, we have to ask, at what point does the bridge finally break?
That's such a powerful opening. That image, the rotary phone versus the smartphone notification. It's everything, isn't it?
It is. And it's not just about, old versus new tech. It's about the entire operating system of a life.
Exactly. It's the psychological and structural cement.
It just hasn't had time to set. The transition was so incredibly rapid. And what you're describing isn't just nostalgia for a simpler time. It's about a deep-seated feeling that the structural integrity of this new world is, well, questionable.
That story it stuck with me. Because it isn't just an anecdote about one guy, one senior manager in Bangalore. It feels like the story of an entire generation.
A whole demographic.
Yeah, we see the surface level stuff, the SUV, the fancy coffee, and we chalk it up as success. But underneath all that, there's this profound structural collision happening. It's like looking at a building with a beautiful new facade, but the foundations are groaning under a weight they were never, ever designed to hold. And that really is what we want to do in this deep dive. We want to look past that shiny surface, past the whole new India narrative, and actually unpack this silent crisis. The crisis of the bridge generation India's Gen Y and millennials.
And to be clear, we're not just talking about feelings, are we? This isn't just about stress.
No. Absolutely not. We're going to be digging into three massive concrete structural pillars that are, frankly, cracking under the pressure. We have to dissect the economic reality they're in, the physical environment they live in, and the psychological burden they carry to really understand why this success feels so fragile, so temporary.
And we've got a pretty serious stack of sources to do it. We're looking at economic data, comparing India's service-led growth to the manufacturing models that built other nations. We have some honestly terrifying real estate inflation reports.
They're pretty grim.
We're also looking at analyses of urban planning failures and some really sharp sociological observations on workplace culture.
We are. We're drawing from reports by the Foundation for Economic Development, some analysis from Ideas for India, real estate data from Ivory Tower Media, sociological insights from sources like Marksman Daily and Fabric Shift. It's about connecting the dots. We want to show you why this generation feels like they're on a treadmill that's not just on, but constantly accelerating.
Right, because the answer isn't just work harder. It can't be. It's about the very design of the system they're trying to succeed in.
So let's start with the first pillar, the economy itself, the engine room. Because the path India took to get here, it's historically unique. An anomaly. And that anomaly has very real consequences for the bank accounts and the anxiety levels of people like your friend.
I heard a story recently about a man named Arav, a senior software developer in Hyderabad, and his story just perfectly illustrates the fragility of this service-led growth model.
Okay.
So Arav's father spent 30 years of his life working in a textile mill, a physical, tangible industry. You make cloth, you can touch it, you can see it. That job built the family's first home. Solid, concrete,
A real asset.
Exactly. Now, Orov, by contrast, earns 10 times his father's peak salary. 10 times. He writes code for a Silicon Valley fintech firm. But he often tells his friends on Reddit that he feels like he's building castles in the clouds.
Wow, castles in the clouds. That's hauntingly accurate.
It is, isn't it? He looks at his peers in, say, Vietnam or South Korea, and he sees that they're backed by this massive state capacity that prioritizes manufacturing, physical infrastructure, and Arav feels like his own wealth is just a digital ghost.
It's ephemeral.
Yeah. When the global tech market fluctuates, his generational wealth feels more like a temporary subscription he's paying for. And I see this anxiety everywhere online. Young Indians are realizing that by skipping that industrial factory stage of development, they've been left without the solid physical foundations their parents, funnily enough, took for granted.
You know, we celebrated the office boom for so long. We saw it as leapfrogging the dirty, difficult phase of industrialization. But we've completely ignored the fact that we also leapfrog the structural safety net that only a robust production-heavy economy can provide.
And it creates this paradox, a generation of people who are rich on paper, but who feel precariously, fundamentally poor.
Arav isn't wrong. I mean, economically speaking, he's describing what some economists call premature de-industrialization. It's a concept that really helps explain why a high salary doesn't automatically translate to high security.
Okay, let's break that down. Premature de-industrialization. It sounds pretty bad. When I hear de-industrialization, my mind immediately goes to the Rust Belt in America, or old factory towns in the UK, places that got rich from industry and then the factories closed. But you're saying this happened prematurely in India.
That is the critical distinction. If you look at the historical arc of development, there's a standard path. The West, East Asia, they all followed it. It's a three-step process. Step one, an agrarian economy. Most people are farming. Step two, you build factories. You move into manufacturing. You create a massive number of jobs for low-skilled workers. You build cities. You build infrastructure. You make stuff. This is the stage that builds a broad-based middle class.
And then step three is services, right, once you're already wealthy.
Exactly. Once the country is wealthy and the middle class is stable and established, then you transition to a service-based economy. You build the car first, you generate the wealth, and then you sell the insurance for the car.
You establish a baseline of physical assets and widespread employment before you jump into the more abstract world of finance and IT and consulting.
Right. But the analysis from Ideas for India is pretty clear on this. India basically skips step two. Between 1987 and 2011, you see a big drop in agricultural employment. That's normal. But the crucial question is, where did all those people go?
They didn't go to factories.
They didn't. Manufacturing employment was basically flat, stagnant. So the engine of GDP growth, the thing that created the wealth, became high-end services.
So on paper, everything looks great. GDP is climbing, the whole India rising narrative takes off. But what's the consequence of that jump?
The consequence is that service-led growth is structurally pro-rich.
Because the counter-argument we always hear is, a rising tide lifts all boats. High growth is good for everyone, isn't it?
In a manufacturing-led boom, that's much more true. The rising tide does lift more boats because the barrier to entry is low. You can take someone with a basic education from a village, put them on an assembly line, and in a few years, they're earning a stable middle-class wage. That is how you democratize wealth.
You create a very wide ladder with lots of low rungs.
A very wide ladder. But think about the service sector that Arav works in. What do you need to write code for a global fintech firm or work at a top consulting company?
Oh, you need a specific kind of degree. From a good college, you probably need a master's. You absolutely need fluent, polished English. You need a whole suite of soft skills, how to present, how to navigate these really complex corporate hierarchies.
You need a huge amount of cultural and educational capital. So by skipping the factory stage, we've created an economy where the top 10, maybe 15%, the people who can afford that very specific education benefit, exponentially more than everyone else.
So the wealth is top-heavy.
Extremely top-heavy. It doesn't trickle down as effectively because the person who would have worked in his father's textile mill can't just walk into an interview at Infosys or Google. The rungs on that ladder are missing. They're too far apart.
And that explains why Arav feels like his wealth is a digital ghost. It's disconnected from the physical reality of his own country. If the NASDAQ has a bad quarter, his job could just evaporate. And there's no local, tangible industry to fall back on. He's totally at the mercy of global currents, not domestic foundations.
100%.
Yeah.
And this is where the comparison to the East Asian model becomes so important. It really helps you understand the solid ground that Ara feels is missing from under his feet.
We're talking Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China.
Right. They didn't just let the free market figure it out. They had what political scientists call a developmental state.
The sources mention things like MIT in Japan or the Thai balls in Korea. These weren't just companies. They were like national projects, right? Almost arms of the government.
The state didn't just act as a referee. It was a player coach. They actively directed capital. They picked winners. They said, we are going to become the world's best at making steel or ships or semiconductors. They were laser focused on exports and, crucially, physical infrastructure.
It was about building tangible national capacity, not just watching stock market valuations go up.
It was almost like a military campaign for economic dominance. Now, our sources did have some threads from places like Reddit where people debate this, and it's a fair point.
What's the critique?
The critique is that this model relied on, predatory mercantilism, suppressing wages, and maybe most importantly, having the U.S. security umbrella. America's military presence let them focus entirely on their economies without worrying about defense.
So it's not a model you can just copy-paste into India in 2024. The geopolitical conditions are completely different.
You can't. The WTO rules are different. The world is different. But the underlying principle is what's important. They built tangible, resilient national wealth. You walk around Seoul or Tokyo, you feel it. The subways, the high-speed rail, the public housing, the bridges. That physical infrastructure exists no matter what the global markets do tomorrow. It's a permanent asset base for the entire population.
Whereas in India, we have world-class digital payment systems. UPI is a marvel. I use it constantly, but the road outside my building is full of potholes.
That's the paradox in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have this sleek 21st century digital infrastructure built on top of, in many places, 19th century physical infrastructure. We digitize the transaction, but the physical movement of people and goods is still a massive struggle.
And this brings us right back to the missing safety net. By skipping the factory stage, we also skipped the massive urban build-out that naturally comes with it. If you build a giant car factory, you have to build roads for the trucks. You have to build housing for the thousands of workers. It forces your hand.
But if you build a software park, you just need a good fiber optic line and a big enough generator for when the power goes out. The ancillary development isn't as necessary.
The FAD report we looked at is just brutal on this point. It notes that manufacturing jobs are 3 to 6 times more productive than agriculture. Yet India's manufacturing share of the economy is stuck. It's just hovering around 11 to 12%.
Well, a country like Vietnam is just.
Yeah.
They're eating our lunch. They're becoming a manufacturing powerhouse with a fraction of our population while we're still debating policies.
And that's why Arav's anxiety is so real. His wealth is a subscription. It's entirely dependent on these global service contracts. It's not rooted in domestic state capacity. So the question he's probably asking himself every night is,
if the cloud evaporates, what's left?
in a manufacturing economy, even in a deep recession, you still have the factories, the machinery, the roads, the skilled labor. You have assets. In a pure service economy, if the market crashes, the asset, the code, the consulting deck, the advice, it just vanishes into thin air.
It's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
And it perfectly sets up the next part of this crisis. Because even if you manage to hold on to that fragile cloud-based job, where do you live? How do you even exist in this city that's supposed to be generating all this wealth?
Which brings us to our second segment, the physical environment. The high price cage. I was watching a documentary clip about the daily commute in Bangalore, and it featured a woman named Meera. She's an industrial designer, a high achiever, the absolute definition of a successful millennial.
Okay.
And yet she spends nearly 4 hours of her life every single day trapped in gridlock, just sitting in traffic, breathing in dust and exhaust fumes. She earns what anyone would call a top-tier salary, but 60% of it just vanishes. Poof. Gone. Into rent for a tiny apartment because of the hyperinflation in the real estate market?
60%. That's not living, that's just servicing your life.
It's a cage. To her, the city isn't this land of opportunity, it's a high-priced cage. And I see these debates raging online all the time about how this infrastructure tax, the time and money lost to bad urban planning, is just killing productivity. And when I think about Meera, I realize her social mobility is being physically choked to death by the very city that was supposed to liberate her.
It's such a stark contrast to the efficient state-planned urban centers you see in more manufacturing-oriented economies. They understood that you have to house your workers efficiently for the system to work.
It feels like the Indian dream is literally being priced out of existence. We can talk about GDP growth until we're blue in the face, but if the core workforce can't afford to live near their jobs without sacrificing their health and their sanity, the whole engine is just going to seize up eventually.
It's a systemic failure, but it's disguised as a personal struggle.
That's the key, isn't it? A systemic failure disguised as a personal struggle. Mira probably blames herself. She probably thinks, I just need to budget better, or maybe if I wake up at 4 a.m., I can beat the traffic.
Right. She's trying to find a micro solution to a macro problem. We're asking an entire generation to solve fundamental economic failures with personal life hacks, and it's an impossible ask. The math is rigged against them from the start.
Let's get into that math, because the numbers are they're staggering. We have this analysis from Ivory Tower Media on what they call the salary versus rent trap. It lays out just how the economy is devouring its own workforce.
It's alarming. Let's just look at a very short window, 2022 to 2025. 3 years. In a city like Chennai, house prices jumped by 46%. In Kolkata, 44%.
Hold on, 46%. In 3 years, that's not inflation. That's a vertical line on a graph. It's completely unsustainable.
It's rapid asset hyperinflation. Now put that next to salary growth. Data shows the average salary hike has hit a ceiling. It's averaging about 9.5%.
Okay, so let's do the simple math for everyone listening. You get a 10% raise, you feel great, you think you're moving forward, you take your family out for a nice dinner.
You feel like you've been rewarded for your hard work.
Exactly. But if the rent for your apartment or the price of the house you dream of buying goes up by 15% or 20%, or in Chiang Mai's case, an average of over 15% a year, you are actually getting poorer.
You're losing purchasing power every single day. Your raise is an illusion. It's just damage control to stop you from falling as far behind.
The source gives this really visceral example. In 2022, a decent house in Chennai might cost 75 lakhs. Today, that same house is 1.1 crore.
Think about the down payment on that. Just the 20% cash you need to give the bank. On the 75 lakh house, that's 15 lakhs. On the 1.1 crore house, it's 22 lakhs.
So the down payment alone jumped by 7 lakhs. That's more than most people's annual salary, let alone what they can save in 2 or 3 years. You're running towards a finish line that is moving away from you faster than you can possibly run.
The goalposts aren't just moving. They've been strapped to a rocket. It creates this profound sense of hopelessness. Why bother saving if the target is accelerating away from you?
And this isn't just market demand, is it? The common refrain is, oh, too many people are moving to the cities. But the sources suggest it's a deliberate policy failure.
It's a regulatory failure. It's a failure of the state to either build or create the conditions for others to build adequate housing. We're looking at a man-made scarcity, a supply-side chokehold.
And this ties back directly to the East Asian comparison, doesn't it? My understanding is that when China or Vietnam sets up a special economic zone, housing is part of the blueprint. It's not an afterthought.
It's core infrastructure. They build massive dormitory complexes. They build huge apartment blocks. They understand a simple truth. A worker needs a bed just as much as they need a machine on the factory floor. But in India, our land use regulations are, well, they seem designed to prevent this.
The FED report has this shocking comparison between states.
It's incredible. To house 60,000 workers, a state like Telangana, which has more liberal laws, needs about 40 acres of land.
Okay.
But Gujarat, with its more restrictive laws, needs around 122 acres to house the exact same number of people.
Wait. That's 3 times the land for the same number of homes. How is that even possible? What are these laws doing?
It comes down to really technical but crucial things. FIR, which is floor area ratio, and setbacks. FI dictates how much floor space you can build relative to the plot size. Setbacks dictate how much empty space you have to leave around the building.
So in global manufacturing hubs, they build tall and they build dense to maximize the use of the land.
Of course, it's efficient. But in many parts of India, our laws mandate inefficiency. They force developers to leave huge empty spaces and restrict how high they can build. It's like we're legislating sprawl and scarcity.
We are choosing to make housing expensive. We're prioritizing some outdated code or aesthetic over the fundamental human need for shelter near a job.
And because of this, there's no real middle ground in the housing market. In Vietnam or China, they built those large-scale dorms for workers. In India, our system creates 2 options: informal slum-like colonies or hyper-expensive private apartments. If you're Mira stuck in the middle, neither of those works. You're trapped.
And the rental market should be the safety valve for this, but it's completely broken too. I was looking at the ORF report, and this number just blew my mind. We have 11 million vacant houses in India.
11 million.
It seems like a paradox. We have a massive housing crisis on one hand and 11 million empty homes on the other. Why aren't landlords renting them out to people like Mira?
It's not a paradox. It's a direct policy outcome. It comes down to archaic rent control laws. These laws are so extremely pro-tenant that landlords are, frankly, terrified to rent out their properties.
They're afraid they'll never be able to evict a tenant if they need to, or that they won't be able to raise the rent to match inflation.
Exactly. So if you're a landlord who owns a second apartment, the financially rational decision is to just leave it locked up. Treat it like a safety deposit box made of concrete. Hope it appreciates in value. But don't you dare put a human being in it because the legal risk is too high.
So we've designed a system where property is an asset for capital appreciation, not a home for habitation.
We have. And it's a disaster. It freezes the entire market. So you have millions of empty homes and millions of people like Mira burning 4 hours a day in traffic because they can't find an affordable place to live closer to work. The sheer inefficiency of it all is staggering.
And think about the cost, the productivity cost. Mira's 4 hours in traffic every day. That is lost GDP. That's lost innovation. It's lost creativity. It's lost time with your family. It's lost rest. This infrastructure deficit is a massive invisible tax on our biggest asset, the demographic dividend.
We talk about our young population as our superpower, but we are physically and mentally exhausting our superpower in traffic jams before they even get to their desks.
It really is a high-price cage. You earn a good salary, but the city just takes it all back in rent and time.
But there's one more layer to this crisis, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's not just the external pressures of the economy and the traffic, it's the internal conflict.
Yeah.
It's what's happening inside their heads.
Yes. The psychological weight. This is where the battle gets truly personal. This generation is caught in a cultural crossfire between the values they were raised with and the behaviors they need to adopt to survive.
And that takes us to our third and final segment, the double-bind culture versus capitalism. Imagine a young man named Rohan. He's a middle manager in one of those cutthroat consulting firms in Delhi. And I read this incredibly moving post he wrote online about what he called the silent war inside his head.
The silent war.
Yeah. On one shoulder, he's the voice of his parents, the voice of traditional Indian cultural values, obedience, fitting in, never questioning authority. But on the other shoulder, he's been thrown into the Hunger Games of modern global capitalism, an arena where if you aren't aggressive, if you aren't disruptive, you are replaced, period. So he's being pulled in two completely opposite directions.
Constantly. He feels this crushing guilt whenever he tries to assert himself at work because it feels like disrespect. But then he feels like a failure at home because he can't provide the kind of luxury lifestyle that social media and the economy tell him he's supposed to have.
It's a classic double bind.
And this is what happens when a society tries to run a 21st century competitive race using a 19th century social playbook. You know, I've seen some commentators, usually from the right, argue that millennials just need more grit. But reading Rohan's story, it's so clear that individual grit is not enough when the state fails to provide basic institutional efficiency. Individual survival shouldn't be this hard.
And the mental health crisis we're seeing in Indian Gen Y isn't a sign of weakness. It's the completely logical, predictable result of being asked to win a global war while being tied down by outdated societal anchors and a near total lack of state support. We are literally watching the human cost of a collective survival strategy that hasn't been updated for the modern world.
A collective survival strategy that hasn't been updated. That really frames it perfectly. So let's talk about this double bind that Rohan is in. It's a specific psychological term, right? What does it mean in his day-to-day life?
A double bind is a situation where you're given two conflicting commands, and no matter which one you obey, you lose. You are punished for obeying, and you are punished for disobeying. It creates a feeling of paralysis.
And that medium source we have breaks this down perfectly for Gen Y. It says they groomed by pre-liberalization parents, but have to work in a post-liberalization economy.
Let's unpack that grooming. Think about the values Rohan's parents, who grew up pre-1991, would have instilled in him. It was an economy of scarcity, a socialist past. The goal was to hold on to what you had.
Right. The life script was work first, enjoy later, maybe much later, be stable, don't take risks, save every paisa. A government job was the dream. It was safety.
It was a fundamentally defensive life strategy. Keep your head down. Don't rock the boat. Do what the senior person tells you.
Okay, that's the programming. Now, what about his workplace, the post-liberalization economy?
It's the exact opposite. It's an abundance mindset economy, at least in theory. It demands that you be disruptive. It tells you to take risks. It screams that consumption is status. If you're not visible, you don't exist. It's a purely offensive life strategy.
So Rohan walks into his office, and his global boss on a Zoom call is telling him, disrupt the market, be aggressive. We need you to challenge the status quo. Speak up in the meeting.
And then he looks at his Indian manager sitting next to him, or just listens to that voice of his parents in his head, and it's telling him, be obedient, fit in, don't cause trouble, why are you so loud? He is literally fighting his own upbringing just to perform his job description.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
And the sources from Marksman Daily and Fabric Shift show how this plays out in the office itself. We've imported the aesthetic of Silicon Valley, the open plan offices, the bean bags, the claims of flat structures and open door policies. But it's a thin veneer. Underneath, the deep-rooted feudal hierarchy is alive and well.
Oh, the Sir Madam culture. It's everywhere. The idea that your boss isn't just your manager, they're your superior in a much more fundamental, almost feudal sense.
So imagine Rohan in a meeting. His global director in London wants him to critically analyze an idea to make it better. That's what innovation requires. But his local manager sitting across the table has a cultural programming that expects complete deference.
So if Rohan speaks up and challenges the idea, he's being disrespectful to his immediate boss. But if he stays silent, he's not showing leadership potential to the global team.
He cannot win. It is a psychological trap that paralyzes him. He ends up spending so much cognitive energy just navigating the protocol and managing the egos that he has no energy left for the actual work of innovating. It's a tax on creativity.
And then you layer on the pressure of lifestyle inflation. The Medium source was brilliant on this. 20 years ago, a Chith rod was a once-in-a-lifetime achievement. Now, if you miss the latest Coldplay concert or you're not driving a Creta or an SUV, you feel like you're actively falling behind your peers.
The goalposts for what constitutes a good life have been moved into the stratosphere.
But is that just vanity? Is it just people wanting to show off on Instagram? Or is it something more structural?
I think it's much deeper. In a more traditional caste or community-based society, your status was largely fixed by birth. You knew your place. In a hyper-capitalist society, your status is determined by what you consume. Your car, your phone, your holidays, they aren't just things. They are signals of your worth.
So the pressure to consume is a pressure to prove you belong, to prove you've made it.
And the data shows the cost of that pressure. India's household debt has tripled in the last decade.
Tripled? That's insane. So people are literally leveraging their entire future to buy the appearance of success today. They're financing the costume before they've secured the role.
They are, and the mental health statistics show the strain. 45% of millennials reporting significant stress. 53% reporting mood swings. This isn't just normal work stress. This is existential dissonance. It's the sound of a personality cracking under the pressure of trying to be two different people at once.
Which is why the term bridge generation from the source material is so perfect. They are the only ones who have a living memory of the analog world. The scooters, the landlines, the single TV channel, but are now completely fluent in and judged by the standards of the digital world.
They are carrying the trauma of scarcity passed down from their parents. And at the same time, they're dealing with the anxiety of abundance or the illusion of abundance that's being pushed on them by the market. No other generation has had to carry both of those loads simultaneously.
Gen Z was born into the digital world. They don't have that analog reference point. Gen X was shaped by the analog world and often struggles to adapt. But Gen Y has to be the translator between the two. Constant.
And being a translator is the most exhausting job in the world. You're constantly code switching, value switching, expectation switching. You never get to just be.
So when you stack all of this up, the psychological exhaustion from this double bind, on top of the economic fragility of the service sector, on top of the physical exhaustion from the infrastructure deficit, it's no wonder Rohan feels like he's fighting a silent war. Yeah. He is.
So let's just recap what we've seen. We've looked at these three crushing weights. First, the economic pillar. That's Arav, the software developer, living in a service-led economy that creates incredible wealth, but with no physical safety net. We see the profound fragility of a system that skipped the industrial phase.
Then we have the physical pillar. That's Mira, the industrial designer, trapped in a high-priced cage. An urban infrastructure and housing market that just devours her income and her time, all driven by these deep regulatory failures. We see how the city itself has become an adversary, not an enabler.
And finally, the psychological pillar. That's Rohan, the consultant, caught in a culture clash between the obedience he was taught and the aggression the market demands. We see the incredible mental toll of being forced to live in two different centuries at the exact same time.
When you put all three together, you start to see a really clear picture. The glossy image of the new India is, in many ways, being subsidized by the burnout of this bridge generation.
The silent crisis isn't a personal failing. It's not because they aren't working hard enough or aren't gritty enough. It is a crisis of state capacity and a failure to update our social contracts for the world we actually live in.
We're asking them to run a marathon, but we've dressed them in a suit of armor that was designed for a different battle. It doesn't fit anymore. We're asking them to perform magic, but we haven't given them the basic infrastructure to support it.
It's just not a sustainable model. A bridge, any bridge, can only bear so much weight before its structural integrity is compromised.
I really want to leave our listeners with this final thought from that Medium article because it's both beautiful and tragic, and I think it sums up the entire situation perfectly. This generation, Gen Y, they grew up believing in magic. They were kids during the economic boom of the 2000s. They watched the country transform before their very eyes. They were told that if they just studied hard and worked hard, that magic would work for them too.
They're the children of the liberalization dream.
They are. But now, as adults, they're realizing their true role. They are the bridge, the human bridge between a socialist past and a capitalist future. And the tragedy, and maybe the ultimate painful realization for this generation, is that they cannot carry both of those worlds perfectly. The bridge is creaking, not because it's weak, but because it is bearing the entire crushing weight of a civilization's rapid, chaotic, and incomplete transformation.
And that is a weight that no single generation should ever have to carry alone.